Welcome to Narcissist Apocalypse, everyone. I am Brandon Chadwick, and today we're going to be doing an educational follow-up to Andrea's Survivor story. And if you wanted to be a guest like Andrea was on our Survivor stories, go to our website at narcissistapocalypse.com. Click on our guest form button at the top of the page, fill out our guest form, and press the submit button. Also, you can email us at narcissistapocalypse@pm.me. And we also have a new newsletter, which has a free workbook inside from this episode, as well as all future episodes that we will be having. People really like our newsletter, so sign up to our newsletter at our website. You can find it on there to sign up, or click the link in our show notes. And in this follow-up episode today, we are going to be breaking down the key themes and takeaways from Andrea's story. We're going to be discussing the fear, obligation, guilt, and shame from Andrea's story. We're going to be doing an analogy to help you feel it a little bit more. And we'll also be doing what we hope for people like Andrea going forward. But before we get into any of it, I just want to give you context to this episode. If you haven't listened to Andrea's Survivor story, and we'll leave a link to Andrea's Survivor story in our show notes. So for anyone who hasn't listened to Andrea's story began in early childhood. There was sexual abuse that happened by her father when she was 4.5 years old. And at the start of this harm, her mother became aware that something inappropriate had occurred, and she had a physical reaction and temporarily lost her eyesight. And Andrea was then told by her father that her mother's blindness was her fault, and her mother eventually regained her sight, but the family system did not return to what it had been. And the sexual abuse occurred for many years after that. And alongside of that, Andrea's mother began to hit her, and all emotional warmth was pretty much withdrawn. And this child that once felt this love all of a sudden had it all taken away. And now she felt responsible for her mom's issues, for her mom's life. The parent is physically collapsing and being told that she caused it. And when something like this happens, when a child is blamed for this, the child isn't looking at it as something bad happened. They're looking at it as an I caused something bad. And with the other abuse that was occurring from her dad, Andrea becomes vigilant. Andrea becomes focused on being helpful, compliant, successful, and calm. She began to monitor moods. She attempted to regulate the emotional climate that was going on in the house. She became protective for her younger sister. She's parentified. And for people that don't know what that means, parentification, being parentified, where a child is absorbing adult responsibilities because the adults in this system are unstable or unavailable, or in this case, taking blame for what happened. She now doesn't want this to happen again. So she thinks like anything she does wrong could cause that. So she's now going to go into this mode of making sure that her mom doesn't have that and taking care of her mom's needs. And a structure like this isn't unique to child abuse. In many abusive marriages that we hear on the show, one partner can become the emotional regulator, soothing the conflict, protecting the image of the relationship, and managing instability. And the structure here is pretty similar in this story. Also within their story, Andrea's family moved frequently throughout their childhood, multiple relocations. So this helped with hiding the abuse. No long-term teachers, observing any changes that are going on with the child, no stable mentors over time, no consistent community members or friends able to see things. This frequent relocation that was going on within this family prevents visibility, and it really protects the secrecy of what's going on. And this is a form of isolation. And isolation does not always require a physical confinement. And in this case, it looked like never staying in one place long enough for anyone to see it clearly. And we hear this in many abusive systems, not just in families, but in controlling adult relationships where this can occur as well. and key themes in Andrea's story are self-blame. It's a big one. Parentification through what has occurred here, because she does not want her mom to go blind again, because she has taken that on. Silence is a big thing as a survival mechanism, survival mode. She just wasn't silent to the outside world. She really wanted that silence within herself as well, until her own collapse occurred at the age of 33 years old. So silence was quite helpful as a way for her to survive. Achievement was a big thing for her. That was an escape. Doing well in school, being a ferocious reader, and she got multiple degrees, and that was a way of escapism in a little bit of a way. Even though she was really enjoyed learning, it was a very safe place for Andrea. And something that we kind of mentioned within one of the earlier points here as a key takeaway is that when the breakdown in her life did occur at the age of 33, because in a way it was like a reenactment of her life, she was holding everything down inside her until she couldn't. So she was silent within herself, pushing things down, thinking like that was the right way to do things. She'll just live and she doesn't have to think about these things. But at a certain point, all that can come crashing down when that reenactment happens and everything is brought back up. It's a disruption. And at that point, she was never actually working through any of these things. She was going around these things and compartmentalizing these things, hoping that they wouldn't come back up. But eventually, these compartments all got too big for the closet that they were in. And the closet door at one point couldn't take it anymore. And boom, an event happened and it popped out. So those are the big takeaways that for this story. And when discussing the fear, obligation, guilt, and shame in Andrea's story, for fear, fear was established early on. Once 4.5 happened and the sexual abuse began, there was that boundary violation, a huge boundary violation. So that is a fear right there. All of a sudden, that Andrea is going to be hyper vigilant to that, not wanting that to happen again. And the fear of anyone knowing becomes a big thing to kind of keep you in line, because there's shame attached to it. And an early boundary violation was followed by one of the parents going blind temporarily. It's a dramatic physical reaction. And then the direct message was that she was the one that caused this harm. So a big fear here is not just a fear of punishment, it is a fear of causing this blindness or some physical breakdown in her mom again. And Andrea believed that she caused her mother's blindness, and that will then organize her entire nervous system around preventing that. Hypervigilance, hyper aware, she's very careful. And then we have obligation. And obligation in Andrea's story didn't come from direct instruction, and it came from the event, which was the blindness event. And she began to feel responsible for her mother's emotional state, her mother's happiness, the overall stability of the family, protecting her younger sibling. And children like her in these systems develop a belief, if I do not hold this together, everything will fall apart. And it keeps a child compliant, keeps a child quiet. It kept her being high achieving and helpful. This obligation also kept Andrea functioning long after the harm was done. And things that might be said during this time is, I can't leave, they need me, I'm the stable one. So the child here is carrying the responsibility of the family. And it was a really big thing in her story, this type of obligation to her mom. And then we have guilt. And with Andrea's story, going back to the blindness, when a child internalizes responsibility for her mom, guilt becomes a big identity. So it wasn't, I did something wrong. It was then I am the reason something went wrong. So guilt fueled a lot of what was going on. All of these things are connected to the same thing, the fear, obligation, and guilt. And so this guilt kind of and fueled perfectionism, and academically and professionally. You know, guilt also fueled the silence. If she exposed the truth, she might destroy the family, ruin her mother's stability, and that can confirm that if that happens, if she does say something, that she would be the problem. And we hear this a lot in our relationship survivor stories, where victims often protect the system that is harming them because they feel responsible for the preservation of that system. And then we have shame. And shame differs from guilt because guilt says, I did something bad, and shame says, I am bad. And in Andrea's case, shame was reinforced symbolically through the literature, the Scarlet Letter that was weaponized. You know, narratives of women being marked or exposed, shamed, or presented as like this cautionary thing. So there's that fear of it, but then shame is also being brought in as well. And this shapes her narrative. And she began to believe that disclosure would just not only destabilize the family, it would also stain her identity. Um, Going back to that story of the pastor and the younger woman that had the affair with the pastor got off scot free, but that other person had to wear that scarlet A. And this type of shame, things that could have been going through Andrea's head is like, I allowed this, or no one will understand. So the shame is also isolating, and this isolation, protects abuse. So within Andrea's story, the fear is helping her stay quiet. The obligation is saying you have to hold everything together. The guilt says that you have to fix it. And then the shame is telling her, don't let anyone see. So all of these things, and the fear, obligation, guilt, and shame in Andrea's childhood, really create this system where nothing is being said, and she has to live in the control of this abuse. So now we have an analogy for Andrea's story, and it's called the tilted room. So imagine growing up in a room that suddenly tilts. No one announces it. No one says anything is wrong, but the floor is no longer level. One wall leans, the furniture shifts, balance changes. You look to the people in the room to correct it. One person caused the tilt. The other person sees it, and instead of leveling the floor, they drop to the floor. And the one person that caused the tilt, they say something devastating. The room must be tilted because of you. So you start adjusting. You lean in the opposite direction. You hold your breath. You move carefully so you don't make the tilt worse. And when the person who should be steadying the room struggles to stand again, you then move closer to them. You brace them. You stop asking why the room is tilted. You focus on helping them stay upright. And over time, your muscles adapt. Leaning becomes normal. And from the outside, no one notices the tilt. But inside, you're constantly compensating. And years later, when you enter a perfectly level room, your body still leans. Because you learned early, if something is off balance, it must be your job to correct it. And if someone is unsteady, it must be your job to hold them up, even if they were supposed to be holding you. And that is the crux of Andrea's story, and possibly for a lot of you out there as well. So what do I hope for people like Andrea going forward? Because Andrea has done a lot of work and is in a really good place right now. So I hope people like her no longer feel responsible for stabilizing anyone else. I hope people like Andrea continue to live without bracing. I hope people like Andrea can have achievement that becomes optional rather than feeling necessary. And I hope for people like her that they just have joy and can just be without having to perform or achieve, that they can just be themselves and sit still and, exist without having to prove it at all and to just really be. So those are the things that I really want for everyone who's experienced this, going forward. And I hope that you found this episode helpful or interesting. We have workbooks with more detailed reflections and exercises in them. If you want them, you can sign up to our newsletter at narcissistapocalypse.com. And I hope you found this episode useful, and I hope you have a good night.